Hello everyone, my name is Fejiro and this is cozyfeji, and on this channel we cover a variety of things such as video essays, reviews, JRPGs, and all things cozy gaming. Now JRPGs are my favorite genre. Heck, I even made a video about how much I love JRPGs. However, as much as I love JRPGs, I do have my gripes and cons with them. So today I wanted to share with you guys some JRPG hot takes. But I won't be alone in this one. I asked the community and some of my friends here on YouTube to share with you guys some of their hot takes as well. So recently I made this post here on Twitter as well as my community post or community tab here on the channel. So if you want to be part of videos like this, do not forget to subscribe as well as to follow me on my other social media platforms. But I love making these type of videos because it's always fun to have a little collaboration with other people and have a discourse with the community about topics with JRPGs or anything with gaming as a whole. So without further ado, let's sit back, relax, get your tea, because we're definitely gonna be spilling some with some of these JRPG hot takes. The first hot take that we have is from Nidorom, and they say the last part of JRPGs should be over quicker. You've invested so much time already. Stupidly long boss fights or recycled boss rushes are dumb. I just want to get to the ending. And honestly, this is a take that I definitely agree with. There are certain bosses that are honestly way too long for no reason. And sometimes they do recycle a lot of them. And some of them, they have some cheap mechanics that just kill you in one shot for no reason. Even if you had the best armor in the game, the best build of your character, sometimes these bosses are just pain in my ass sometimes. Also, I really hate, this is I guess my hot take, I don't know if it's a hot take or not, but I hate timed bosses. Why? Why do they exist? It just makes me stressed for no reason. I hate timed bosses. Either way, I definitely agree with that one. Next up, we have Snowly813, and they say, I think more RPGs need a system that lets you know you shouldn't be there yet. Kind of like in Xenoblade Chronicles. Not necessarily with an aggro system, but more so that enemies should have their level alone above them. Many other RPGs do this too, and I like to see more of it. This is actually a take I also agree with. There's sometimes, especially with open world and games, or games with really massive worlds and landscapes, sometimes, you tend to venture out and go into places that you probably have no business being in just yet, but you're curious, you want to know more, and then you're definitely completely humbled real quick, and that's the reason why you shouldn't be there. But yeah, I definitely agree that there should be maybe like you said, like a level above, or maybe like in distinct color, like this is a level monster that's a level that's way too high for you that you'd probably stay away from. But definitely, I think this is a take that a lot of people could agree with. Next up, we have the Fem Trooper, and they say, I think difficulty settings should always be offered. People who don't like easy mode can still choose normal or hard mode. This is one, I'm with you, because I feel like there's been a whole debate on whether or not certain games should just have difficulty settings, or people should play the game as the developer intended you to play it. But that kind of just limits the entry, there's a barrier of entry for a lot of people because the game, is too hard, or let's say they're not accessible enough for other players to play. Because whether they have medical conditions, or maybe they're just not that strong of a gamer just yet, being able to have that opportunity to play that game with the certain difficulty settings makes it a lot more easier for more people to play. So I definitely agree with you. And at the same time, just because there's an easier option doesn't ruin the game. You can still play the game in your merciless or hard mode. It's there still for you. So I don't understand why that's such a huge big deal for a lot of people, but I definitely agree with that take. Next up, we have Jay from Cool Knights Gaming, and he says, turn-based and tactical RPGs will always be better than action RPGs. Now this is actually a pretty interesting hot take, because I feel like in recent years there's been a whole debate on whether turn-based or tactical RPGs are dead, and that developers shouldn't be making combat in this kind of style because it's boring and repetitive. But I honestly don't agree with that sentiment. I feel like with turn-based and tactical RPGs, they give you a lot of room to really study and to take care and build your characters and level up them, as well as there's a lot more thought and strategy going into games like this. And I'm not saying that action RPGs don't have thought and strategy to them, but with turn-based and tactical RPGs, you're really thoroughly thinking out every move and also thinking out your villain's move as well. So, do I agree with this take? Maybe. Maybe I do. Maybe. Next up, we have Happy Wander, and they say the more graphics and fidelity increases, the less JRPGs are able to do. JRPGs are big games already, and the time applied to rendering everything in 4K 3D means less time on other systems, building more in-depth worlds. Games still cannot do what Ultima 7 and Star Control 2 did. Now this is something I also kind of agree with. Man, I'm agreeing a lot of these takes. But I honestly feel like we're so like caught up and hung up with the graphic fidelity of certain games that I'm not saying that the game should like be stuttering like all hell and like it's unplayable. But like, and it obviously needs to be playable to an extent, but also I feel like there are other factors that need to be considered in making a good game, like great character development, good story, good plot. All of those other factors definitely matter, or to me, matter a little bit more than if it's like 120 FPS or the refresh rate is just like at the best it could possibly be. Like, it doesn't really matter that much. Obviously, again, like I don't want the game to be like a stuttering mess, but there are other aspects to the game development and just the game overall that should be looked at as well. Next up, we have at Houdini Font, and they say Final Fantasy XIII is a great game with fun gameplay and plenty to do. Its linearity breaks at the last 3 chapters, and the setup for the Grand Pulse was well executed. People love to hate it because it's an edgy thing to do. Now this is an interesting one because I feel like when Final Fantasy XIII came out, even though I wasn't there at the time, but what I've heard from people looking back at it, FF13 released with not such great reviews. A lot of people did not care or liked the game because of how linear it was. The characters seemed a little annoying and the plot was really convoluted. But as someone who's played FF13 in recent years, I literally just played it this past couple months ago, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time. I played on my Steam Deck and got cozy with it and put in a lot of hours and thoroughly enjoyed my time. I thought like first at the beginning the characters are kind of unbearable, but they grow on you. And the story was really cool and the premise was really interesting. And they do have these like, I forgot what they're called, but they have these story pages in the menu that you can access to really get to understand the story. And if you missed any story beats, you can go back to it just to catch up. Because there are some parts where it does kind of get like over my head at times. But once I go back to those pages and read it up, everything makes sense. So, but again, I think we're now at a time with the more recent FF title was FF16 coming out. And with the remake, a lot of people have gone back to that game and realized maybe we gave that game a little too much hate. We need to give it a little more credit. And I definitely agree that FF13 is definitely a good game. Out of the 3, I think 3 that I've played, FF13 is definitely up there for sure, for me as of right now. I have yet to play the other entries, but I think FF13 is a great game. Next up, we have mainly Joe with FF7R is overrated. I love the original, but this is bloated, overly linear, and tries too hard to make you care about side characters. I enjoyed Crisis Core more out of the 2 recent releases. Interesting, because I feel like FF7 Remake is definitely I feel like I've heard really good things about it, and a lot of people love and raved and have really great things to say about the remake. I've never really heard someone say that they think that it was a little bloated. I've heard that it's a little too linear for sure. As someone who has watched the Let's Play of FF7R, as well as now I'm currently playing the original FF7, it's really interesting because with the remake, I don't know if this is a spoiler or not, but with the remake, they pretty much really flesh out the whole Midgar section of the game in comparison to the OG, where the Midgar section is a very small few hours of the intro of the game. So I honestly like when they were able to flesh out the characters, because I feel like when the developers went in mind with remaking FF7, there were a lot of things that they wanted to explore, and that means maybe fleshing out certain characters that we didn't have the opportunity to do so in the original. And I also want to keep in mind that with the original, they probably didn't have the resources or the time or the capability to really flesh out or give other characters the time to breathe or have their time to shine. So they wanted to explore that with the remake, and they're definitely exploring all new heights with Rebirth coming out in February. So I don't know, I kind of disagree with that take, but it's definitely a hot one for sure. Next one, we have Space EG, and they say there are way too many of them. The genre is oversaturated. Now, again, I'm going to disagree with you because I love JRPGs. I can never get enough of them. As someone who recently got into JRPGs in recent years, there's so many that are coming out like recently, and there's also a huge catalog and backlog of games that have come out in the past that I want to experience as well for the first time. And every time there's a big gaming event, whether that be like the Game Awards or a Nintendo Direct or a PlayStation State of Play, I always look forward to whatever JRPG that they're dropping. That's honestly one of my highly anticipated games to look forward to every year. So I don't think it's oversaturated. Maybe there's certain plots that have been redone many times before, but I don't think it's not that saturated. I don't think so. Next up, we have Gamer Gal Mila, also on here on YouTube. Hey, she has a few pieces here. JRPG developers must always localize their games for consoles as well as PC wherever possible. Not doing so is a serious error in judgment that leads to said games bombing in the West. You miss out on the physical and collector's market as well as the hype train overall. Some examples: Xseed's localization of the old Falcon games, Xanadu Next, Zwei 1 and 2, Ys Origin, Sherivune's localization of Aqua Plus titles on PC, Dungeon Travelers, Monaco Mobius, and Once.emu ported Ys Origin to consoles. That game got attention, similar with Mononobe. And I definitely agree with this one. I think localization really does matter. I feel like, especially now today, JRPGs are honestly the biggest boom they've ever been in recent years. I know in the 2010s and early 2000s, JRPGs were kind of like laughed at and made fun of for the story and plot and all that in its anime-esque likeness, but I feel like we're in a JRPG golden era, honestly, or at least a new revival or renaissance, you could say, with JRPGs. And I definitely think that when now more people being more acceptable and more receptive to JRPGs, localization matters now more than ever. So definitely a good hot take. The next one we have is from @somethingclassic, and they say JRPGs are good actually, and the mechanics don't need fixing. You just don't like them. Right. I feel like sometimes a lot of people just love to shit on JRPGs when they probably have never completed a whole JRPG or maybe never even played them themselves. They just hear from their friends talk crap about it, therefore they should. So just give them a chance. Yeah, there's some mechanics that are a little wonky at times, but like overall, JRPGs are a lot of fun. Next up, we have @Vapid Nonsense with, you don't need 2 hours of world building up front. Make me interested in the world and characters before telling me about the war between Lord Ark and Estonia. This is actually a pretty interesting take because it really depends on, like for me specifically, it depends on my mood. If I'm in in it and I want to just take my time with the game, I don't mind sitting a couple hours of just getting really invested into the world and the lore and really understand why we're in the war that we're in. But there are some times where I'm playing FS7 where they just jump you right into the mess of it all, and it's really interesting. It really depends. I guess it just depends. But I definitely understand where you're coming from. I definitely think it's a take for sure. Next up, we have Shinky_plays with, not every combat system needs to be revolutionary and reinvent the wheel. Sometimes a nice and simple system is more than enough. And I totally agree with this one because I feel like, again, we're in 2023 heading on to 2024. Games have been around for decades now, and it's kind of an unreasonable ask to make every new game come out try something new and innovative because there's so many games out there. It's hard to make something super different and super out there that has a new fad or whatever, or new trend or new thing to that said game. Sometimes if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I definitely agree with you. Sometimes simple is best, and that's okay. Next up, we have @SleepyGamer with, they need to improve their storytelling and make things more relatable. Some get it right, but many are too melodramatic, too repetitive, and especially so conceptually out there you can't relate to anything going on. This is a pretty interesting take. I mean, I do love a story where I have characters that I can relate to and are relatable. It makes them it makes you or allows you to be more invested into the game. But sometimes you want to play a game because you want to escape the reality, and sometimes if it's too convoluted or too complex or very out there and outlandish, maybe that's the better. Because sometimes you're just like, yeah, that realistically would never happen, but I'm playing a game. I could definitely remove myself from reality in that instance, but definitely an interesting take nonetheless. Next up, we have @Ken_Overmeyer with, they are great once you get into them. You generally can make the characters you play as whatever you want most of the time and have very rich stories. Yes, I definitely think that's really interesting with JRPGs or just any RPG in general. You can build characters however you want and enjoy the game however you want to. A great example would be like if I'm playing Fire Emblem Three Houses and I want to make Lysithea into a beast like of a tank, I can if I wanted to, and no one would like bat an eye or judge me for it because I can if I want to. And they have awesome rich stories that I just don't see other genres do as well. Obviously other genres do great stories, but JRPG specifically always prioritize, or at least try to prioritize, a good storyline. Not always do, but a good story and rich stories are definitely what I'm here for. Next up, we have at Hermit's G with, not sure if it's a hot take, but I think party members should be able to buy their own weapons or armor. Now this is a take. When I saw this, I was kind of confused by it. Like, do you mean like, do they like play it themselves, like buy it themselves, or like, because usually what happens in RPGs, you have like your main protagonist and then you buy the weapons for them and then equip them with it. Or are you saying that like the individual character themselves should go off and buy it themselves? Or like, do they have their own free range to customize it themselves? If that's the case, interesting, because I feel like when AI gets involved, or when the computer decides or the game decides to build a character a certain way, yeah, sometimes it can help with a game, or sometimes you just want to do it yourself and create it however you want, but to each their own. Next up, we have Xenogrey Volt with, more turn-based games need to strip or rethink overworld encounters and sneak attacks. It's way too easy to just steamroll mob encounters when getting sneak attacks in easy and 99% of JRPGs. Now, I'm going to be opposing on this. I don't mind sneak attacks because for me, I hate random encounters. They are the bane of my existence. I'm currently playing FS7 and there's definitely a lot more random encounters, and I know random encounters are pretty commonplace in older games, but I find them so irritating. You could like go into a battle, cool, and then literally within 2 steps later, you're already into another encounter. I'm just like, can I just get to where I need to get to without being bombarded by like 10 random encounters? Like, they get annoying. So being able to have sneak attacks allows me to choose when I want to go into an encounter. Because I think even with sneak attacks, like I said, you can control whether or not you can steamroll or you can just, go about every battle you want to. So interesting take nonetheless. Next up, we have at Save for Waffles, and they say, FF7 Remake, while a great game, would have benefited from a smaller runtime, would have had better pacing had it been 15 hours instead of what it was. Same with other games. They don't need to stretch it out to make it as long as possible. Less is more sometimes. And I guess I want to piggyback to what I was talking about to the other hot take about how FF7 Remake was too bloated or just too long. And I think it was just a creative choice that they made. Because the people who played the original, like, wow, this mid-car section is really, really long. But again, like I mentioned before, I think the developers and the team wanted to explore and flesh out certain things that they couldn't do back then. And 30 hours of comparison to any JRPG is pretty, like, to me, is like pretty short. Like, you can get through that if you're really, really, really committed and have no other plans and no social life. You could definitely get through that in a weekend. I'm not saying that you should, but you definitely could. So next up, we have another hot take from at Vanished Omens, and they put some few. Number 1, party members need to be multi-race in more games. A bunch of humans banding together is okay sometimes, but gets boring. I think there's a beauty, like in real life, of entirely different backgrounds and cultures, and these characters being forced to learn and grow from each other. That's such a nice and sweet and wholesome take, and I totally agree with you, because like in real life, being surrounded with people of different backgrounds and cultures allows you to grow and learn more and enriches your story and your growth as well as a person, and having that in a game also helps enrich the story and the growth of the characters as well. So definitely agree with that take. Number 2, multi-row systems are wearing thin these days. A lot of times they overstay their welcome and become a chore. Almost feels like artificial padding sometimes. Now this one I kind of agree with. As much as I do like multiple routes, like I loved Fire Emblem Three Houses. I love that game so much I played it 5 times. I didn't need to do that, and I definitely understand that it does get repetitive after a while, but having New Game Plus definitely helps speed up the process. But after doing like the multiple routes, like the first 6 chapters in each route are practically the same. I wish there was a way to like expedite that process just to get to like the good part, but teach their own. And then the last one is, not everything has to be a giant and open. The fight against linearity is weird. Linearity is still okay today. This is also another one I agree with too. I feel like we are so caught up with everything being open world, and that whenever a game that comes out that's somewhat linear or has a linear gameplay, gameplay, everyone likes to like come down at it and say like, oh, this is not a good game, it's too linear, too boring. But like sometimes having a linear game is fine. It's a refreshing take, especially sometimes open world and really massive games like that can be overwhelming. Sometimes I just want to be able to go from point A to point B without being distracted or kind of like being burdened with how massive a world can be. So I don't know, if there's a happy medium, like that's fine. I think those are fine too. Next up we have from @Natenlo with Dragon Quest is better than Final Fantasy. Now this is an interesting hot take because as someone I have not played any of the Dragon Quest games. I do have some in my backlog and I do own some, but I've never physically or played them myself, but I've heard great things. And Final Fantasy is also another well-loved. I mean, they're both like the OGs of JRPGs. They're like the backbone of what JRPGs are today. So it's a really interesting one. I would love to know what other people would say or thoughts on whether they prefer Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy. Next up, we have @MadKaiser98 with controlling other party members will feel invalid if your MC has a shit ton of variety and tools than all of them combined. Hence why FF16, Nier Series, Scarlet Nexus, and Kingdom Hearts have strayed away from this. And honestly, that kind of does make sense. Even though as much as I would love to play other characters, if the main protagonist or the main character that you're playing as already has all their powers or skills or traits, then it kind of makes them playing kind of defeat the purpose of playing them. So I definitely agree with you on that part. Next up, we have Boundary Break with random encounters when riding a boat can almost ruin a game. Honestly, just random encounters, if not done well, can literally ruin the game. If I'm literally, like I mentioned earlier, if I'm literally being bombarded with random encounter after random encounter after random encounter, I will literally drop the game. I cannot stand them. They are the bane of my existence. Calm down. I just really don't like them, so I definitely agree with you on that take as well. Next up, we have @Gaming with Spoons. They have a few, so they have two. Number one, they focus too much on fan service and dating elements over the past decade. Outside of Persona, none know how to balance these and tell a good story at the same time. And two, developers need to stop making complex, convoluted battle systems and just stick to the basics. Now, in terms of the romance aspect in terms of games, it really just depends on how the developers execute it or how the writers execute it in the game, because there are definitely romance options where it's definitely fan servicey, but unless it's like a pretty integral part to the game, like a Persona or even Fire Emblem or something like that, I think unless it's done and written well, then it's totally fine. I'm a sucker for romance anyways, regardless of any medium, whether that's video games, books, movies, whatever. I eat that shit up, so the more the merrier. But it can get a little fan servicey at times, especially if the romance isn't like superficial or surface level. Like I want it to be like meaningful and the characters truly do care for each other and love for each other. So I definitely understand that. And then as for the second one, yeah, I honestly think that sometimes when people try to make something new and set themselves apart from other games, they do kind of go onto off the spectrum and make gaming mechanics and certain aspects of the game way too convoluted and hard for people to get into, and just overall doesn't make the gameplay experience that much fun. So I understand that one. Next up, we have @StevieAnderson7 with a few hot takes. Replay value is much more greater than tons of post-game content, which is why I believe all RPG fans should try out Persona, Megaten, Star Ocean, etc. They do contain a large amount of content, but also tons of replay value, and sometimes a replay is more than 40+ hour floor post-game dungeons. On that note as well, I need JRPGs to stop having cakewalk final bosses. Turn-based RPGs are usually turned to be far too easy, so I think most of their easy modes should be removed unless even that will involve the player paying attention. And finally, I think if turn-based RPGs is going to be easy, it should be kind of like Final Fantasy X, where normal encounters aren't too hard, but require you to engage and switch out party members to adapt, so at least the player isn't just mashing X and A to attack. Interesting. I definitely understand, like, for me, when it comes to like post-game content, or just like when games have replay value, like for me, I don't really replay video games that often, especially JRPGs. They're all really long, and I do not have time to sit down and play another 60 hours a game, no matter how much I love it. again, there are exceptions to that, but like for the most part, I don't really replay games that often. So if it does have post-game content where I could just come in and pick it up whenever, that's awesome and that's great. But you won't really catch me replay games that often, unless I can just pick it up and go, and they don't have to like relearn or redo things over and over again. So definitely understand that one. Next up, we have at Mega Man RA with, if a JRPG plays bad, then it's a fact a bad game, even if the story was enjoyable. Now this is an interesting one because I know like I'm gonna get mixed ones, but I do not agree with this one. I definitely am a person that prioritizes story in my games, especially in JRPGs. If the story and character development and narrative is not good, but the gameplay is great, I just won't have a good time. And a great example for me for this would be Fire Emblem Engage. I know. I say this a lot. I've reiterated a lot of how much I disdain that game. But that game for me was such a disappointment, and I was really looking forward to it because I love Fire Emblem. But that story was absolutely horrible. It was bad. The mechanics and the gameplay and combat was fun, but it just could not save the story because, to be honest, for me, I could not care less about the characters. The story was just ridiculous at times, and so by the time I finished, I was like, well, I'm glad I'm done, and I'm probably gonna go put that back on my shelf, and it's just gonna collect dust. So I don't know, I kind of disagree with that hot take, but I know that there's definitely gonna be people who agree with you, but I'm sorry, I'm just not one of those people. Next up, we have at Evan McKeel with Kefka is an overrated villain. Now I know Kefka is from FF6, and I have not played that one, and I know that Kefka is a notoriously known and well-loved villain in the series, but I don't know, I would love to throw in my 2 cents once I get to that game and entry. Next up, we have at Zenbloke, and they say, do they all need to have fantastic hair? And honestly, do they? Because they're giving me mad envy and jealousy because they have they're like, honestly, a lot of JRPG characters are way too beautiful for no reason. Like, I know this is technically not a JRPG, but an RPG nonetheless. The way that I had thirsted over this man here alone, Clive from FF16, I mean, his hair is alright, but like him as a character is just beautiful. No business, like absolutely no business. Next up, we have at Way to the Elysium. A hot take I would say is that JRPGs shouldn't be considered good if the story is poor or non-existent. The whole point of an RPG is to role play in a story. Without a good story, it's nothing more than a battle simulator. Mic drop. This is a hot take that I definitely agree with, because I feel like I see more people say that like the story could be dog shit, but as long as the gameplay is addicting and fun, then I'm fine with it. I'm like, I just can't relate to that like at all. If the gameplay is great, but the story is not there, then what am I playing? Especially a RPG, a JRPG, a role-playing game. The whole point of view is to get immersive into the role-playing aspect of the game. And if I can't be immersed in it because the story is not there, then I could just play a platformer or something like that. Then I know that I'm not expecting a good story. So I don't know. Definitely agree with that take for sure. And I think it's definitely a hot one for sure, because I know a lot of people would say, then why do you play games? The whole point of playing games is to play a game, not read a book. Get out of here with that nonsense. The next one we have is at Henry High 3649483 with, I find Octopath Traveler enjoyable, a hot take. Now, I have yet to play the Octopath games. I do have Octopath 1 and 2. Again, I have so many games, I just have literally not enough time to play them all. But I know that Octopath, the first one, was a good game, but some of the gaming mechanics and the story not being as interwoven as it could have been kind of like docked it a few points. But I've heard Octopath Traveler 2 is amazing. And from the demo that I played from it and its art style being amazing, I don't know, it might be a hot take because I know a lot of people really love the Octopath series because they were literally the ones that birthed the HD 2D kind of style. So now we have some of our community post ones. So at Ham0 says, one of the problems that JRPGs have had for years is mediocre dungeon design. FF10 had Closter Trials or FF13 had Teijin Tower. I think what they lack is making them more immersive. Now that's really interesting because I am a person that does not really love dungeon crawling aspects. They can get really repetitive and really boring after a while. I'm just like, get me out of here. But yeah, they need to have some puzzle like elements to it, or I don't know, something engaging to me to get me to keep playing it. Because if it has too many dungeon crawling aspects, I'm just like, I'm not here for it. I'm good. So I kind of agree. Next up, we have Bish K12, where JRPGs have actually gotten better in the last 10 years, not worse. Now, this is an interesting take because as someone who is more familiar with more modern JRPGs than I am with classics and older JRPGs, it's interesting like playing games like FF7, the original, and how different it is in terms of like obviously the aesthetic and look and obviously the feel of it. Like, I'm not gonna lie, when I'm playing FF7, the original, the way that the game is laid out, I'm kind of get lost sometimes because like the way you maneuver some places, like you have to like, I don't know how to describe it. Like there's one aspect in the game during like trying to get to Eris' house where you're going through this path with the claw and everything. There's like this little pipe or like railing thing that you have to get onto. But I had the hardest time finding where to get to it. I would climb up to a certain point thinking I'm getting to the this railing thing, but apparently you had to go into the bottom to get to it. It was just really weird. I don't know if because of how old it was and how it was laid out, it just made it difficult. And there were definitely multiple aspects like that in the game where I had difficulty maneuvering through it just because of how the mechanics and how it was laid out back then and how I probably wouldn't have had that kind of issue with the modern game. But either way, I definitely understand how I think older games have a harder to entry than they do with modern ones. Next up, we have at LexNull5266 with my hot take is I'll take the E series over Final Fantasy series any day. Another one going against Final Fantasy. Now the E series is a series that I've only dabbled a little bit in. I'm currently playing through the tutorials in the Legend of Heroes series. I played a little bit of E's Origin and I had to drop it because I kind of got stumped at a certain boss and I just didn't want to rage quit, so I decided, you know what, let's step that aside. But I definitely want to dabble more into the E series because I've heard really great things about them as well. So the next hot take that we have is from @mintmin3533 with I actually enjoyed FF13. Another FF13 lover. We love to see it. We love to see the support and the love for FF13. Next up we have @Paizen Noticed You. Some JRPGs are just way too long. And you know what? I understand it. As much as I do love JRPGs, sometimes I feel like some of it could have been cut in half. It depends on how I'm feeling. If I really want to be immersed into a long story, it's great. But as someone who is going to school, works as well, sometimes I don't have the time to put in for a 50+ hour game. And so being able to just get what I want in like 30 hours would be a blessing, or even shorter would be greater. So the next person that we have is from Glimmering Harpy. Hello, Raya. And she says, I actually love longer run storylines. I want a dense, immersive experience that has in-depth integrated side quests and NPC interactions. And again, I feel like with this kind of this take is that it depends on what I'm feeling for. If I'm in a game in a mood to just play something quick and something to the point, playing a game where I have to interact with every single NPC and all that, such as I do and love that because it adds to the lore and the world and to the story. Sometimes I just want to get to the point, get what I need to do, but also enjoy my time with it. But again, t-shirt, because I love things like the Trail series where every NPC has something to say or adds to the lore and to the world and the story. But then sometimes I like games like FF16 where some of the side quests and NPCs aren't super immersive, but they still add to the elements of the story. But if you didn't do them, it wouldn't like completely lose out on the story. So again, it's all about preference for sure. Next up, we have @SarahLloyd119 with this is barely lukewarm, but graphics should be really low on the priorities of JRPG devs. Writing systems, character development, and as someone else has already mentioned, dungeon design are all far more important than the shiny things. Yes, like I mentioned earlier, I totally agree with you that I feel like with JRPGs, graphic fidelity and the graphics definitely should not be the top priority. It's not that it shouldn't be looked at over, like it should not be overlooked, but it shouldn't be like a top priority. Next up, we have @Merlin Yggdrasil. I hope I said that right. JRPG hot takes. I have two. Although the story and characters are phenomenal, all of the life sim aspects are boring in Persona 3, 4, and 5. Also, the original Final Fantasy 3 is one of the most underrated and important Final Fantasy games. Now, I think the life sim aspects to Persona 3, 4, and 5 are interesting because the life sim aspect help you in the long term, in the long run in the game, because it also helps you with combat and building relationships with these characters also help immerse yourself into the story, because the bonds that you make with these characters help a lot with the overarching story. And I personally love the life sim aspect. That's what's the main draw, I think, for the Persona games, or at least the more modern Persona games. And then as for the original FF33 game, I have not played it yet, but I will definitely get to it. I'm working my way down. I started with 16 and I'm working my way backwards, so it'll be a while till I get there, but I definitely am looking forward to it nonetheless. And the last hot take that we have is from Niche Quick Pops, and they say, Final Fantasy as a series has no direction at times and can be very overrated when there are so many other better JRPG series out there. Ooh, that's definitely a hot take for sure. I think that Final Fantasy is being such a OG of the JRPG genre, and a lot of people, when they think of JRPGs, they automatically think of Final Fantasy. And I do agree that there are definitely other JRPG franchises that maybe do things a little bit better than what the FF series does. I don't know. I still, again, I'm not too experienced with them all. I've only played and completed a total of 3, but I want to save my opinions on the overall series as a whole until I played them all. But like, there are definitely, for me, other franchises that I prefer over Final Fantasy as of right now. Like, I love the Xenoblade Chronicles franchise or the Xeno series. I love Fire Emblem. But yeah, there are definitely other JRPGs that I think should also receive their flowers and loved just as much love and flowers that Final Fantasy does as well. And with that is pretty much all of our JRPG hot takes. If you guys enjoyed this video, do not forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and also comment down below. Did you agree with some of these hot takes, or maybe did you disagree? And if so, leave your comments and your opinions down below. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and have a good one. Bye!